We're going to call a meeting to order. It's a few minutes after 5 on the 13th. And the first thing we're going to do is Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to have Buzz Schott. Would you lead us in the pledge of the flag, please?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Buzz. Okay, we're going to have the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Or a second? Okay, please vote. Thank you. Let's see, we'll move into public comments. Anybody have any public comments? Please step to the podium. You have 5 minutes to state your name for the record, please.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tony Ramos. I'm an El Centro resident. And I still am a supporter of Mr. Menville and Ms. Mendoza, but being that Mr. Benson is here, I congratulate you, Mr. Benson, and I hope that what you told me outside, that working together does turn out that way. I do hope that you talk to a guy named Jack. I pronounce it Visi, but it's Vessi, right? Yeah, we still have problems with our Mexican culture with the V's and CH's and all that, but in any case, I hope you talk to him about saying, this is what he said, that people getting involved with water and the IID should be farmers. That's what Messi said. Yet, Mr. Benson, the people were the ones that supported you. They believed you in what you said. And I hope that you do compromise and talk to me and everybody else, even though we were at odds back then. You know, one thing I learned in the election this past week, that when Romney took his defeat, he took it proudly as a man. He wasn't crying. He wasn't sobbing. He congratulated Mr. Obama and said, you know what? You're the man now. What's in the past, and that's what I'm here to say. I don't cry on anybody's shoulders, you know. That's what the people wanted. That's what we have to live with. But I do hope that you don't start firing people or like Scaroni said, making fun of the gentleman to my left, to right here, calling them puppet masters. I hope that you guys don't pick on anybody, that you play a fair game, and that, you know, last week, Lindsay Dale, she's not here today because I sat over there and she said she wanted to talk to me about some things. I said, I never picked on that lady. She is a lady. One thing that she did at Brawley meeting we had over there after the forum, she came at me saying why I had talked about the QSA, and that I wasn't in any place knowing what I was talking about. And after that, this guy named Mike Broom, I can remember his first name, also came. And I told him, you know what, you guys do what you want to, and let me do what I want to. And after that, outside here, she picked on me, kind of saying whether I was going to speak in English and Spanish. So I had to come back. But I didn't say nothing mean or bad, you know, nothing derogatory. But be that as it may, you know, I hope, Mr. Benson, that some of the things that you promised, like no electrical rate increases in 2013, you work with that with the people and the other board new members. And that the refund of $150 million with 144,000 accounts does turn out to be over $1,000 a rebate to each one of us, including myself. So I hope you can pull that through. And no more borrowing money to operate IID, the energy. I hope you can also put that through, because these are some of the things that you mentioned. You know, when you make promises, sometimes you can't keep them, but at least, you know, you can work with the other board members and the public to address those issues. It's going to be different without my friends to my right here. But be that as it may, you know, that's the way it goes. I never talk about my personal life, but I once was married, good wife. I thought I'd never be able to live without her, but I found a new wife, and I've been able to live with her now. And she's even 15 years younger than me, because, you know, when she was 5, I was 20 years old. And when she was 15, I was 30. I had to wait till when she was 20 for her mom to allow me to take her out. Otherwise, they would arrest me or probably lynch me in Mexico. Over there, you don't go to jail. They take the law into their hands. So I had to wait for my beautiful wife. And she is beautiful, isn't she, Stella?
She's beautiful.
Bonita, mi esposa. Good woman.
What
But
she sees in you, Tony, I don't know.
I don't know
but
either.
She's beautiful.
Well, you know, it takes two to tango, so maybe that's where she was coming from. And I don't know whether that came out right, but in any case, gentlemen, we have to work together. We can't allow the idea to go down and think that these new members are going to sell out the energy department or sell the water. And I hope, Mr. Benson, because you're the only one here, that you do allow any following money that go to the board and not directly to payments to the farmers, because people are going to be watching and they want a promise to be kept. And as far as I'm concerned, the IID has been around here, and most of us weren't even around at that time. I don't see nobody here 100 years old, okay? And I hope that Mr. Desert and Mr. Hanks, with the experience they got, can work together. Somebody told me, well, you should tell them we're going to unseat them. I'm not going to tell them that. I said, we'll see how Mr. Hanks and Desert work with the other board members. It's a new era. And I got another 20 seconds. Somebody said, well, they took us back 40 years. I said, no, not necessarily. Maybe they took us to the point now where they want new changes. But in any case, I'm still going to be around. I'll be coming here, Mr. Benson. I hope that the last thing I want to do is that you follow the Brown Act, and to follow the Constitution, and allow people to speak their mind. Because, at the end, people and the people have the right to say what they want to, and they shouldn't be held back from saying what they want to. The First Amendment of the Constitution gives you that right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Anybody else for public comments, please step to the podium. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Director Mendoza.
No comment.
Desert.
No comment.
Okay, Director Hanks.
Yes, I would ask that the general manager place on the next agenda a request for information on the training and the trading that's going on, and also like to see the performance results that Z Global is getting. May take a while, but I would like for the internal auditors to pull that together for us.
Okay, thank you, Director Hanks. My only comments are, I just want to say, I know he's not a director yet, but Mr. Benson, congratulations to you and Mr. Kuhn, and I'm sure that Mrs. Galindo will pull it out because she's gaining votes. So congratulations to the 3 new directors. And we're going to, Mr. Kelly, we're going to have the La Quinta meeting on the 3rd is going to be here in El Centro, right?
With the board's
Yeah,
concurrence.
that's what I think everybody's okay with that. So we'll have a meeting here on the 20th, and then we're having a meeting here on the 3rd of December, and then on the 7th of December is when the new board takes official oath of office, and that's, Gloria, what is that, like at 10 or 11?
Noon.
What time?
12.
12 o'clock? Okay. All right, very good. Mr. Kelly, you have any comments?
No, sir.
Mr. Taylor?
No comments.
All right, thank you. Let's see, we'll move into consent. So does anybody have any of these 1 through 5 items that need to be pulled? If not, somebody make a motion.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, please vote. Thank you. We'll move right into information. Item number 6, binational activities related to minute order number 319. And I guess, Mr. Carter, you're going to handle that?
Good evening, board members. Pleasure to be with you again. I am going to give you a brief summary of the expected new binational minute number 319 to be signed probably next week. And I'm here to provide information about the various documents that ask the IID board to consider and take action on at a meeting sometime, I think General Manager is saying perhaps Monday the 19th of this month. With me today is, of course, is Jesse Silva. He's been working with me on these binational negotiations. Tina Shields, of course. And I'd like to introduce at this time, just to make sure that you understand that we have a very distinguished guest here tonight, and he's going to be able to answer any questions you might have, or I might have even, as he's been intimately involved on a daily basis with these negotiations with Mexico and with the other basin states representatives. The newly crowned Regional Director, Bureau of Reclamation, the lower division states, Terry Folk. Welcome, Terry.
Welcome, Derek.
As you see from your board memorandum, the minute 319 is really the next step in minutes that I've talked to you about before between the United States and Mexico under the auspices of the State Department International Boundary and Water Commission. You recall that the last time I addressed the board on this issue was for minute number 318, which was a minute that was signed that primarily dealt with the infrastructure damage in the Mexicali Valley, and it allowed Mexico to be able to reduce its deliveries and reduce its apportionment over the last couple of years and store that water in the reservoirs in the United States and be able to take delivery of that water at some time in the future. As part of that minute and minutes that preceded 318, there's been a much discussion between Iid and Mexico that relates to the 1944 Water Treaty and how the United States and Mexico can cooperate and try to make the best use of Colorado River water as possible. I think you also recall that in 2007, the Department of Interior issued a record of decision that provided for essentially a new regime of how to better manage Colorado River system here in the United States. So all of that coupled together has now led to this new minute 319, and it will provide. I went into quite a bit of detail in the board memo, but let me just summarize it for you and kind of cut to the chase. It would provide, for the first time ever, for reduced deliveries to Mexico under low reservoir conditions. It would provide the right to Mexico to share in increased supplies, surplus supplies, if you will, under certain high reservoir conditions. It would allow Mexico to continue to store water in the U.S. system for future use. It would provide for some of that water through investments made by U.S. contractors to convert that conserved or new water supply to what we call binational ICS, similar to what you all have heard about under the 2007 record of decision, ICS, intentionally created surplus. It would allow for a project that, as part of the 319-minute pilot project, allow for water to be created through investments, a substantial amount coming from the United States that Mexico could store and then use that stored water for binational environmental water, such as the Colorado River Delta. That is the main focus of it.
You're talking about La Cienega, right?
The Cienega and the Delta and the Limitrof section, yes.
Okay.
Director Mendoza.
Mr. Carter, last night on KPBS, they had a documentary by Robert Redford on La Cienega, and exactly what you're talking about.
I've seen that. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think all of us that really have lived here, and some of us that have been born and raised here in the valley and have experienced, the beauty of Mexico. This is a good step forward. The United States helping Mexico and the environmental community to help the Cienega and the Delta itself and the Limber Grove section. As part of this collaborative effort, some of the environmental organizations are also contributing significant funds to allow this additional water to be made available. So I think all in all, the package, if you will, is going to be extremely beneficial both to the United States and to Mexico. And it frankly also sets the stage for additional collaborative efforts to allow water that can be conserved or new water sources such as desal in Mexico to be made available not only to Mexico, but to U.S. users, thereby helping our system. This water that we're talking about under 319 could mean as much as a million two acre feet being stored in the U.S. reservoirs, which will help, frankly, those reservoirs to remain higher. I think I recall that Jesse said 1.5 million acre feet is something like 15 feet. Well, that's significant. So there are a lot of benefits, I believe, to this collaborative effort. With respect to the agreements that will be before the IID board for their review and consideration and approval, I've listed those in the board memo. One is a interim operating agreement. It is a document that essentially sets the rules and the guidelines for implementation of Minute 319. As I say in the memo, this is essentially a 5-year program. It's not anything longer than that, other than sets the stage for further discussions and negotiations for other minutes similar to this. That's a document that the IID, together with the United States, is a signatory to, along with the other basin states representatives, and certainly, of course, the California agencies. With respect to the 2012 forbearance agreement, that is a document similar to what this board acted upon and approved in 2007, and it essentially provides that any water that is developed as a result of investments in Mexico would not be subject to claim by another contractor that doesn't enter into such an agreement. So it's a safeguard, if you will, since this is under the law of the river considered surplus supply. As you know, other users have certain rights according to their priority. But the forbearance agreement essentially would protect those who want to invest in this binational intentionally created surplus. There is a memorandum of agreement. That's essentially, I view it as a promise by the United States to implement 319 and the various agreements to make sure that that's consistent with 319, and an agreement that if there are any disputes, that the United States, before just making a decision as to move forward one way or the other, would consult with contractors such as IID before making that decision. There is a delivery agreement form that you have actually in the board folder which would be utilized by IED should it decide to participate in the binational ICS pilot program. That is very similar to the delivery agreement that IED has entered into with Reclamation under the 2007 ICS guidelines. There is an agreement in your board folder with MWD, and that provides that the parties will use their best efforts to provide for IED's participation in binational ICS pilot project if IED elects to do so.
Could you go into that a little bit further?
Sure.
How would the IED participate?
By paying investing money along with the other contractors being the state of Nevada, the state of Arizona, and California currently being the Metropolitan Water District, and therefore we have an agreement with them, should this board approve all of these other documents, to move forward and negotiate IED's participation in that binational ICS program.
But how would the IED participate in those conservation programs opportunities in Mexico? Isn't that what you said a little earlier?
Yes. By funding the cost associated with that program. And that cost is pegged at approximately $105 an acre foot investment in Mexico. That provides some water to cover losses over the term of the program, and also provide water, acre feet, if you will, for that investment.
So for the IED could participate in the future and perhaps buy some $105 an acre foot water from Mexico?
Yes. And that would be converted as a result of Mexico's doing those conservation projects. Mexico would reduce its diversion as part of its apportionment. That water then would remain in a binational ICS account, similar to the ICS account that IED currently has under the 2007 guidelines.
So even though the way that this document's written, the Metropolitan Water District would get the other 50% of participation in the share of the savings over 5 years, and the IED wouldn't participate there. The Metropolitan Water District would allow the IED to purchase conserved water out of Mexico in the future?
No, this agreement only provides for the participation in the 5-year binational project.
Okay,
This
so the
interim
$105
period.
water would be the water behind the dam and in the states that's being stored?
The minute doesn't provide for it that way, Director Desert. It essentially talks about conservation projects. The obvious one would be, since this is a fairly short period of time, would be fallowed water from the Mexicali Valley.
So that would be above and beyond the 1.25 million acre feet that the 5-year proposition before us is going to generate.
Correct. It would be separate ICS accounts for U.S. contractors who fund the investments in the conservation program.
And the other agencies in Metropolitan are okay with IED participating in that?
Well, that's why we have to have an agreement, is to enter into good faith negotiations to provide for IED's participation in that. Met takes a legal position, that they're the only ones in California that have the right to surplus because they're junior priority holders. We take the position just opposite of that. Yeah. So in order to move forward with this program, we agreed that we would, and they agreed that we would continue to negotiate with IED.
And Terry agrees with us, right?
I'm sure he does. He agrees with all contractors.
Yeah, because in past discussion of this item, we were looking at splitting that 50% of California's portion of that's generated.
Correct.
So it'd be 25% IID, 25% metropolitan, which would equate to somewhere around 25,000 acre feet. Not a lot of water, but it would give us parity with our other neighbors on the lower Colorado that are participating in this, especially with Mexico, with us being the bordering neighbor to Mexico.
Yeah,
And,
you're
and the way
absolutely
it's written today is we are not going to participate in that.
The way the contributed funds agreement that IID is not a signatory to has 50% of that binational ICS water being paid for by MWD, and IID is going to negotiate at the board's direction with MWD to receive a share of that 50% water, just as we did, frankly, in 2007. We did the same thing in 2007.
But the way it's written, presented here, is it's all going to go to Metropolitan.
Correct. And
So-
that's the reason for the IID MWD agreement to say that IID can negotiate with MWD and make arrangements for participation. The contributed funds agreement, even though IID is not a party, I think I cited the provision in your board memo. There's a provision in there that says that that it's expected that IID and MWD will sit down and try to work out an arrangement like we did in 2007. And assuming that that is done, then IID will have all of the rights to that share that MWD has.
The success that was experienced is in 2007, I'm not familiar with, but I think if you had a scoreboard, there's more of a lack of success between negotiations and communication between Metropolitan and the IID. So I'm curious as why the IID doesn't get a fair standing or position at the table in this document, rather than being playing second fiddle, subservient to Metropolitan.
My only response to you is what I'd said to you before, is that we have a difference of opinion as to our legal rights versus their legal rights to share in this project.
But it isn't just between the IID and Metropolitan, this issue. It's between Mexico, it's between Arizona, it's between Nevada. It's a bureau. Yet Metropolitan comes to the table and it appears to be dictating our second position or in authority over our area and an opportunity to participate here. And it also, consequently, if this results in a negative vote by this board, are there opportunities lost in the future, such as the $105 acre water for fallowing in Mexico, which is significantly less than what it costs us at this time?
Would there be opportunities lost? Just to be candid with you, perhaps. I think it's important for IID to be a participant and to negotiate the acceptable terms to do that, because there is no question in my mind there will be significant quantities of water that will be available from Mexico, and IID needs to stay at the table in order to participate with that in the future.
Yeah, we need to stay at the table, absolutely, but it seems we're getting off to a difficult step forward here at the beginning on yet another item. You know, and we just can't seem to get that kind of parity that we're looking for or understanding with Metropolitan, with the larger population base they have and the larger finances that they bring to the table. But it shouldn't always be that way, should it? When there's other agencies involved and we're trying to get representation, we're struggling to do our best with the QSA and wet water transfers and delivering quite a bit of water per that agreement.
I couldn't agree with you more, Director Desert.
Is there a previous resolution, Mr. Kelly, that comes into play here that we had in discussion about minute 318 or 319 of the board?
There is. The board passed a resolution in November of 2011 that I believe the secretaries provided to your board as a refresher. And in addition, I sent a follow-up letter to the Bureau in January of this year reiterating IID's position that our concerns extended beyond salinity impacts and lost hydro generation to include storage and the proposed turnout on the All-American Canal.
Yeah,
one additional facet that I think that the board needs to take into account. Mr. Carter, over the last several weeks, has been trying to secure a place for IID by name in the construction agreement.
Contributed funds agreement.
Contributed funds agreement. And so that was where Metropolitan asserted this fundamental legal dispute. And the way that these documents seek to get around that is in this letter agreement between IID and MWD.
And also, as I said, the provisions in the contributed funds agreement itself.
So the contributed funds agreement is the one that'll allow us to participate in that future Mexico fallowing for $105 an acre foot.
Yes, if we come to agreement, which I'm confident we will, with MWD, then ID would essentially be a party to that contributed funds agreement. It would step into part of Met's shoes, if you will.
But once we started trying to get a seat at that table, that's what triggered the loss of the 25% of the 5-year plan.
So the contributed funds agreement omits any reference to IID, and the letter agreement with MWD is the means of bridging that disagreement in the future.
Let me
But once again, it takes us to that same relationship with MWD that we're in court over many issues. So early mitigation, water to the Salton Sea, to name one, we still haven't resolved.
You're correct. That's the way it is. So we continue to express our displeasure with that, but we're willing to in some instances go forward and negotiate an agreement with MWD. I think with the help of the good offices of the regional director here. And I'm convinced that we will do that. It's just a matter of having to get past this issue and coming to an agreement as to the quantity of IED's participation. And I just wanted to add to what Mr. Kelly said. As I said, there is a provision in the contributed funds agreement that names IID as a potential participant in that program. This might be a good time to, maybe Mr. Fulp has some thoughts about this and able to answer any other questions you might have.
Before we do that, I'd like to make a couple comments.
Go ahead.
I don't see a value of this being negative about this agreement, international agreement, for a couple of reasons. One, it's the State Department and their negotiations. Do we really know what they're negotiating? Do we really know whether there's involvement on the Tijuana River or the Rio Grande? We know basically what they let us know. And that's a done deal. Regardless of how we vote, they're gonna move on with it. So, the question comes back to what Director Desert mentioned. Will that do us harm in the long run to oppose it when it's really out of our hands? I think what is in our hands is a side letter. The agreement with to enter into negotiations with MWD. I mean, that's kind of where the pavement meets the road for us. Having said that, I believe that the the Mexican treaty, the 1944 water agreement that they have is very similar to our perfected water rights. We have an agreement, and a very strong agreement. Yeah, I'm concerned about the turnout on the All-American with the capacity, priorities of that capacity, and
Siphon.
the siphon, you know, those, there are some impacts there, and I don't know whether the State Department has even considered it. But having said that, this board adopted a template with DeMar's presentation about moving forward on issues brought before us, timeliness, and so forth. And I'd like to see the general manager develop a resolution that points in a direction where we want to go. I think everyone hears what we're saying here about parity. We're a similar situation here. We have the same seismic capabilities. You know, if that happens, would we get similar consideration and putting our system back together? But these are the things that I would like to see a resolution focused towards, because I do think it sets some things in motion, like Mr. Carter mentioned, and also the general manager. I think it would be very important that in the resolution that we talk about storage and water banking capabilities for the IID. I also think it's important to stress the expended efforts that we're making towards water conservation. You know, they set all these goals and contracts out there. They have, I think, given little consideration to the amount of effort and the difficulties we have in reaching that, and what that is going to look like when we get it complete, and what the expense is going to be. Also like to see at least a whereas talking about a commitment to sustain agriculture. Also protection of the environment and mitigation effects of transfers on the Salton Sea. We hear them talking about the delta of the Colorado River, and we know what's happening around us with the Salton Sea. And I think this is a good time to push that forward as a consideration of similar interests that we have here, being low on the river. Also, I think it's important to mention the IID senior position on the river. There's you know, again, I'd like to mention, as far as the State Department, we really have no idea what's in that agreement. We really don't know what that involves or could involve, and what goes on other than there at that table, you know. But I am concerned about the side agreements, that we get some teeth in there, so that whenever we move forward and negotiate there, that's just not a bone that's been thrown to us just to kick the can down the road, let this go on through. But I'm very concerned that if we take action to disapprove of this, what the long-term effect will have, whether that plays into their handbook. Say the IID doesn't participate, doesn't compromise, when in fact it is always the IID that compromises and gets.
So are you proposing, Director Hanks, some sort of overarching resolution that would be a in addition to these 4 documents you're being asked
Yeah,
to
and I
vote on.
think it would go back and answer the resolution that we approved with the DeMars report. That there be certain considerations given before action is taken by this board. And I think these items need to be included in there so that it does meet the terms of the resolution that we pass.
And that resolution would express your reservations about the IID MWD side letter.
Yes.
Is that would that approach enable an up or down vote on the 4 documents, John?
I think that would be, I think it would be helpful for IED, again, to go on the record. I think that, I think your regional director, I was just making a few notes from what Mr. Hanks was saying, that a number of those, I think, he can address that you don't necessarily see in the documents. I'll start teeing them up for you. One would be, gee, what happens if something happens to the All-American Canal and we can't take delivery of water here for a period of time? There aren't any rules, I don't think, to deal with that, but we might like to hear from Terry as to what his thoughts are, at least, about that.
I think this kind of opens the door in that direction.
Right.
And I think we need to kick that door open to head that direction.
I guess the second one that he might address is your comment about, well, you don't know what the State Department is going to do. I think we can say we do know what the State Department is going to do. We don't know what would happen if IID did not approve these agreements. Maybe the regional director can address that. With respect to the All-American Canal, I think he will tell you that there are words, and words in a minute are they're fought over, word by word by word. But I think it's pretty clear when you see the minute, it will say there are a number of issues that have to be resolved. And those issues are a list that Jesse and I gave the commissioner of IBWC, U.S. Commissioner of IBWC, saying all these need to be resolved. And he says, yes, absolutely. So we might ask the regional director to comment on that because he's been intimately involved in the negotiations for the minute. And he's been at the table, so he can tell you exactly what's going on with
reading
those
through
issues.
these documents, I agree with what you just said. I don't see anything in there that really commits anyone to anything other than we're talking. We're headed that direction.
It's as I said as I began. I think this minute is historic. Frankly, I think even 318 was, historic. Nothing has happened like that since the treaty, since 1944. So it's a new era, if you will, of collaboration and cooperation with another country dealing with Colorado River issues. And it's to our collective benefits. Even if IID, in my opinion, doesn't participate in any conserved water supplies, the fact that additional water can be made available to others in the United States frankly reduces the pressure upon IID to have to come to make another deal to transfer conserved water. It creates an additional supply that can help meet those needs. It also helps potentially keep the reservoir levels higher, and so there's less risk of a shortage, even though IID has very senior rights and wouldn't have necessarily to share in a shortage. At some point, politics might make that happen. So the more water you can put in the system, the less risk there's going to be. So there are a number of things that I think are in IID's best interest. go forward with
Could
this.
I say
Director
something? And
Mendoza.
John, I think what we need to remember that this is an interim agreement, and it's a pilot agreement. It's for 5 years.
Correct.
It's not going to last forever. And so it's something that we need to work with and try to make it work, and it's for 5 years. So
Right, and find out how it is going to work. Frankly,
Yeah.
that's the purpose of this.
It's an experiment.
It is. That's the purpose of this. Good. That's a very good point.
Yeah, before Terry comes up, I know, John, I think it's, it's always important that the ID stays at the table. And I know you've been involved in these negotiations because they're at the Colorado River Board. They usually turn to you because I call you the water buffalo. You know, you've been around for 40 years.
I never thought I'd ever hear that about
Yeah,
myself.
but that's what you are. But I mean, that the IID, even though it seems like we get the short end of the stick sometimes in dealing with MWD, we need to stay at the table.
Yeah.
And I know, like in the 2007 agreement, where we were able to put 25,000 acre feet behind the dam and 25,000 acre feet in Diamond Valley Lake over there, Director Mendoza and I, because that was a 3-2 vote, we got criticized at election time by Jimmy Abadi, saying we were making another water transfer. And so you've got your critics out there that want certain things a certain way. You know, it's $105 water. You've got people here who want to get another water transfer going and sell water for $1,000 an acre foot and et cetera. So you're dealing with all kinds of issues here. But the idea, and this board is elected to protect the water rights of the Imperial Irrigation District and the valley to sustain agriculture. And so you got to stay at the table. And, it's a tough job. Once you get elected to this board, as Mr. Benson will find, it's a lot easier sitting out on the outside throwing rocks at everybody than it is sitting in here and having to make tough decisions that a lot of people don't like.
I'll never forget over my years as I've become a water buffalo, that as new board members have come on the IID board, I mean, to a person, they all say, "Wow, I never had any idea how complex this is," and that everyone is after our water, which is true because the IID has the largest water right on the river.
Yeah, and then to your credit, I know you get condemned for running up legal bills sometimes, but you've been involved in this Mexico-U.S. relationship. You've been heavily involved in it, and I think you've been looking out for the best interest of the IID. And because I've seen them turn to you at the Colorado River Boards and ask you for your advice on certain things. And I know that also the big complaint was that the State Department is dealing with Mexico, and California and other people had to stay in the other room and couldn't be involved in some things. As Director Hanks says, some of these decisions are already made because it deals with the State Department of Mexico. We try to get the best deal we can out of this thing and protect ourselves.
And as you know, it's not easy.
No, it's not easy at all. You know, nobody likes MWD, and me included, but, we have a deal with them for 105,000 acre feet. They built the water control building. Water control building on the ID property in Imperial was funded by MWD. Right. A lot of people probably don't even know that.
Well, I just add to what, I've said to this board over many years now. The point is correct. What is the best way to protect the water rights that we have? And we try to pick the best vehicle, the best means to do that. We've never been shy about litigating. If we need to litigate, we will. You just have to, that's why you have the board members here to make those tough decisions.
Okay. Terry, anybody have any other comments for Mr. Carter? We'll bring Terry up.
Well, first of all, let me say it's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the invitation. I was thinking I've been here maybe a half a dozen times, and I started out the first time I talked to you all as the operations manager. Now I stand before you as the regional director. I pinch myself sometimes still, trying to make sure I'm awake and wondering how exactly I got to this. Before I start, I've written down a few things I want to address, and then if I missed any of them, please, I apologize and ask me again. I just want to start by saying that we, the Bureau of Reclamation, Lower Colorado Region, and me personally value our relationship extremely with the Imperial Irrigation District. We have a long-standing relationship with you, and as Mr. Carter alluded to, I understand setting all legal principles aside or views aside. I don't mean to downplay those, but I personally stand ready to help in any way as you all talk to Metropolitan Water District. As Mr. Carter mentioned in this letter agreement, we'll help in any way possible. With that said, Director Mendoza, you mentioned this is a test. It really is. This is a pilot, 5 years. Oftentimes on this river system, that's the best we can do is to try it and see how it works out. I think this falls exactly into that category. With that said, Director Desert, I think you asked the question. This sets us up for a lot of future opportunities on this river system. Those opportunities are very clear in that Mexico has an antiquated delivery system. They don't have the financial support in their country to really improve it, as many of our U.S. systems have now been improved. They will continue, in my opinion, to look toward the U.S. to see what we can do in this collaborative spirit to benefit both countries. And of course, that is the benefit to the U.S. side is to in turn get some of that water, and that's what this pilot test is all about. I wanted to point out just that, in my opinion, this is kind of the next step in the collaborations on this river. When we did this thing in 2007 and starting even back leading to the QSA, we've been trying this collaborative approach to find solutions to these complex problems where everyone benefits. And I think this is one of those, again, next steps and we'll see how it turns out after 5 years, quite frankly. But I do believe there's lots of opportunities in the future. Director Hanks, you addressed the State Department. Certainly, it is their action. Amendment to the treaty is signed by the two commissioners of the International Boundary and Water Commission, which is under the auspices of each country's State Department. With that said, Reclamation's involvement is extremely critical. We operate this system, and all of you, including the IID, are critical to that operation. We'll continue to operate it in the right manner, making sure you get your water just as other entities. And by saying that, what I mean to say is we've been in the thick of all these negotiations, and I absolutely assure you we are making sure that the U.S. and particularly the water users in the lower basin interest are represented in that. We have a great relationship with the International Boundary and Water Commission, I believe. And it's been formulated way before my time, but I'll tell you, it's really been solidified over the last 4 years, and particularly the last 2 years of really hard negotiations here. We'll continue to do that and make sure, particularly for the All-American Canal turnout, this is absolutely wouldn't go forward without IID's involvement and agreement that it makes sense. That's just how this will work. And all of these future projects we see kind of lining up that way. Mexico has projects they've identified that make sense. We have to then look at them to see if they make sense to us. And that's will continue into the future as it has already. I just want to point out one other thing. Mr. Carter did a great job explaining kind of the concepts behind this minute and the agreement. One of the things that was very clear was Mexico was not able to complete all of their repairs due to their earthquake damage. And as you recall, that was the 318 that we called it. That minute allowed Mexico to have some time to make those repairs and store their water up in the U.S. reservoirs. Well, they've not done. So one of the other things this minute 319 does is extend the key provisions of 318 to allow them more time. So just as they can create this thing kind of like ICS, we call it ICMA, they can also continue on with their repairs and and utilize within limits U.S. reservoirs to store that water. So it's a good neighbor approach, I think, a good collaborative approach still with our neighbor to the south. Let's see. I think I covered the All-American Canal. I think Mr. Carter, in our discussion, asked, well, what if IED doesn't approve it? Let me not directly answer that, perhaps, but let me say it this way, and if we need to discuss further, I'd be glad to. We believe this should be a collaborative approach with all of us agreeing to do it. And so we really hope that you all do see it in the way that we see it, and that it is really a good deal for all of us on this river system. And it's, again, given that it's a test now with good future opportunities, we think it really makes good sense. With that said, this is an important agreement to all of us, and if you all feel that it's not a good enough agreement to move forward, I would love to be able to have a further discussion with you all through your staff, of course, through Mr. Carter as appropriate, but we would really love to see if we can address issues if there are still issues that you all see, and we would be glad to do that. I guess I'd conclude and then see if I've covered the things you wanted me to. I just reemphasize the great partnership that I personally have with your staff. And Ms. Shields is here, or was, and John Carter, of course, and Mr. Kelly and Mr. Silva, who I've known for many years. So we just extremely value our relationship. We're all in this together, and we'll do what we can to hopefully move us all forward. With that said, let me see if there are other things that you wanted me to address.
Does anybody have any questions?
I just like to make one last comment. I think you probably sense some of the feelings that we have, whether you call it a stepchild or whatever. But the truth is, if it hadn't been for the development of Imperial Valley, there wouldn't have been much of a water entitlement for the state of California. You know, they always take a look down here and see how we're using the water and so forth, but if we hadn't, our forefathers hadn't developed the Imperial Valley, it would have been about 1 million acre-feet of water for the rest of California instead of 4.4. Yeah, somewhere that gets lost along the way.
Very good. That comment is well taken. I might just add that we might not have built Hoover Dam when we built it either, if that hadn't been the case.
What is the, Mr. Carter, what is, you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, Terry, I'd just like to get your outlook on the 50% that Metropolitan's going to take over the 5 years. 50% of 100,000 acre feet, so 50,000 acre feet, of which the IED we were optimistically looking at getting a place at the table and participating, maybe setting a precedence where we're finally participating equally with our neighbors, which would be 25,000 acre feet. As far as IED goes, it's kind of a de minimis amount of water, but for others, it's a lot of water. And what does the Bureau, what's their perspective on Met coming in and setting the table up that no, the IED shouldn't be able to participate with everyone else along the lower Colorado River, but don't worry, we'll take care of it through a sidebar arrangement, a side letter. Because that is a big obstacle there. And so if I could get some comments from you on that and perhaps some suggestions from you, maybe we could amend that before we take a vote.
Well, I think let me take one step back just a bit in that what has happened in the last, over the last few years, let's say, with regard to participation in these ICS projects, it was typically the junior priority users in each of the 3 states that expressed the interest in doing so mostly. I don't mean to say that others didn't, but because at the time, especially with still a lot of growth in the M&I sectors in these states, that those kinds of projects typically had been funded by those three entities. And so in some sense, we perhaps viewed this one the same. Understanding precedent and legal theory, et cetera, or at least legal positions, certainly that can be re-looked at. But I think it was more just kind of the way it had been happening with our pilot here with the YDP unit, the salting plant, and some other of those kinds of test programs. Those three junior users typically were who either needed the water at the time or wanted the water at the time. So now we are here. Certainly I understand your all's desire and need to participate. I believe Mr. Carter explained it very well in that what we're looking for from the federal perspective is that we can move on down the road, quite frankly, and find something that works for everybody. We are often seeking that balance, and it's not an easy balance, frankly, to find because we value our relationships with all of our districts, again, including you all. So we felt at the time we have that this agreement that's been proposed was a pretty reasonable solution to again set us up for the future.
You think there's any likelihood that this could be amended somehow before we take vote?
I think it would be, quite frankly, difficult just because we're so short on time, as we all know. I mean, sometimes, as you all know, I mean, what's going on across the border, of course, is the administration there will change, and
Right.
and that happens soon.
That's correct.
And
Do we know, Mr. Carter, when did Met make these changes, or because we were getting updates on this, and is this somewhat of a surprise, or is this a last-minute change that Met put in there?
Yeah, I would say that it came somewhat as a surprise because I've always looked at it, and others that agree with my position, that this is really different than water that is developed in the United States and can become ICS, as we did in 2007. Met claiming they only had the right under their contract to store, for example. So I look at it differently, and it was somewhat of a surprise that they I'll say kind of towards the midnight hour, took this position, at least that I was aware of. And on top of that, Mexico, through the summer months, really weren't pushing to get this minute done. And all of a sudden, I think Mr. Kelly knows that I send him an email and say, I just heard from Mr. Fulp that Mexico wants to go forward and they want to get everything done before December 1st. And that was towards around the first part to middle of October. And we're only in November right now. So that's how fast this has moved.
Yeah.
So, having said all that, through a lot of effort, not just on my part, not just on Jesse's part, but with at the table, the Colorado River Board Executive Officer Tanya Trujillo, with Bart Fisher, the chair of the Colorado River Board, with Department of Interior Solicitor Bob Snow, with Terry Fulp, with a number of people physically at the table to try to hammer out an agreement with Met. We frankly ran out of time. And so that's the reason for the agreement that you see before you now.
Because I believe there was a meeting at Met that was broadcast on the web. Is that the first meeting 10 days ago, a week ago?
Yes.
When they said that the ID would not participate?
Yes.
I mean, that's kind of last minute. And then the other members of the Colorado River Board that you mentioned earlier, they're all aware of Met's position at that time, or was there another meeting after that?
I think they were aware of Met's position before the
Right.
Met board meeting last week, but it's been relatively recent. Let's put it that way.
Mr. Keller, do you want to say something?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Fulp for attending. I think that signifies how much importance that our own government places on this agreement. The gestation period of this minute has proceeded in fits and starts. If you look back at your November resolution, you can see that it talks about urgency and a speeded up timetable. I believe that you've gone through at least 4 hard dates in which everybody had to sign off on this, and that probably is because of the difficulty in getting both countries to agree, and not to mention all the water contractors on this side. But Metropolitan's position has been consistent throughout. Mr. Carter will remember that he urged me to talk to my counterpart at MWD, and at that time it was a smaller quantity of water, and we were fighting over 6,000 acre feet, and he didn't want us to have any of it. So I'm not as sanguine about this side letter with Metropolitan and the prospects of a breakthrough in 5 years. Having said that, I think it is far-sighted of this board to go ahead and approve this binational agreement, because there are a number of areas in which we are going to need the help of the Bureau and the help of the Commissioner. And some of those areas we will need the Bureau to settle disputes between us and Metropolitan. So for that reason, I think that it's a far-sighted approach to sort of grin and bear it, and to be inside the tent rather than outside of it.
Yeah, Mr. Carter, I might add, and you know this, that if the other water agencies could vote, they'd vote that we get no water at all. So
Yeah, of course. They think you have way too much.
yeah, that's right. So we're fortunate to have what we have, but it's a constant battle because nobody wants us. I think we have 3.1 million acre feet, and we're water hogs.
Yeah,
I don't think we should get anything.
You're exactly right. That's a battle. I might ask, if you don't mind, I asked again Mr. Fulp to comment. One of the questions, if you feel free to comment about, maybe 2 things. What do you envision would happen if the All-American Canal had an earthquake damage and for a period of time ID couldn't deliver water? That'd be first. And the second question is, if you can, you might make some comments about your goal in dealing with issues that were raised by some of the board members here about, IID's trying. See, we've got this QSA, we're trying to put this into effect, we're trying to implement it, if you will, and it's difficult for all kinds of reasons. And then we have a tendency sometimes to overrun. We're trying to deal with that issue on top of things. But you might just comment about, since you've been involved, how you see that process moving forward.
Sure. Let me take the latter one first. We understand this water transfer, conservation transfer, known as the QSA, is monumental. It's huge. It's a huge amount of conservation, and it's a large amount of water. I think we all, having now had 10 years into it roughly, can learn from that implementation and know that there were going to be implementation issues. Of course, any big thing, complex thing like this will have them. I think we're on a very good path to resolving these implementation type of issues. Are we there yet on all of them? No. We have certainly have still some different views. We'll always have some different views amongst the water contractors and potentially even between us, your agency and mine. But I think what we've seen is that ability to set aside maybe differences in legal theory and find pragmatic and practical solutions, and we're doing that right now, in my opinion. And so we're working on, for instance, with a small group of us, with the concurrence of all the general managers, we're trying to look at what kind of flexibility do we need to hit those transfers as postulated in that agreement that we call the Colorado River Water Delivery Agreement. There's a big matrix in the back, and it's got all these years in it, and it shows what should happen. But we all know things change. For instance, the All-American Canal lining was delayed. Well, that changed how those numbers would really work out in practice. So we're working really hard on that issue now, is what kind of flexibility makes sense to keep this agreement practical so that we can move it forward. So that's just an example. I think we're on a really good path. I think we've got good communication. We're working hard. We've got technical groups, small groups working on these things, as well as discussions at the higher levels. So I think we're just going to continue to work diligently to make sure that we can implement, all of us can implement that agreement, and it works for all of us. The first point Mr. Carter asked me to address is what would happen in a catastrophic situation. Well, let me just say this. I mean, we would sit down immediately and look for, again, a very collaborative set of measures to help the Imperial Irrigation District through such a calamity, if that were to happen to the canal that we own and you operate for us. So how that would pan out, I don't know, but certainly that's what we, as an example, what we did with our neighbors to the south, and quite frankly, we don't have near the relationship with them that we have with you. So we would just absolutely sit down and try to figure out how best to handle that, and how best to try to get some water down here and keep everybody running, and what to do with the other water, park it up in reservoirs, whatever it is. So I assure you we would not abandon you by any means, and it would take all of us to get over that kind of a hump in the road.
You know, prior to the QSA, I don't believe we had any overruns, did we?
The answer to that question is no, because IED wasn't quantified at 3.1. It was because IED could utilize water in the first three priorities up to 3.85.
Point two, we had a couple years since I've been on the board where back to back, where there was depressed markets, and there was about 250,000 acre feet each year that was underused, went to Met.
Yes.
Okay, which was part of the agreement.
Correct.
So part of the QSA agreement is an overuse. Now we're having some decent markets, and there's some overuse of 100 acre feet or a little more for a couple of years, and all of a sudden it just goes ballistic. But yet the storage issue, now this thing's got to be balanced. And if we're going to be quantified like we are, and still on those off years, the underuse and the water flows, but on the years whenever the markets are good, without the storage, okay, it makes it very difficult to continue to cooperate whenever you have this imbalance. And I just want to make sure that the message is heard.
Well, I know it's heard. We are, as Mr. Fulp said, we involved in these discussions on the river over the last 15 years now are looking at ways to create more flexibility, looking at ways to reduce impacts because of low reservoir conditions, looking at ways to, under the QSA IID being quantified at 3.1, the only thing we had available to us at that time, frankly, was the inadvertent overrun program, up to 310,000 acre feet max. That was a primary consideration that IID received in order to agree to go forward. Mr. Phillip can tell you that there's some people in the other states that don't understand that because they weren't at the table. And so we're trying to educate them as to, why we negotiated this type of an arrangement. Then on top of that, we have some ability now, IID does, to store water and meat and in met up to a max of 100,000 acre feet, actually, 50/50. And so it's next steps. It's the incremental progress that we're trying to make here, and to provide, just from an IID standpoint, to provide IID with as much flexibility as it can have. And initiatives in Mexico, I think, is the next step, will help. So we just need to keep moving down that path, and I think hopefully things will improve. Terry, any comments about that?
Well, I think John just hit the nail on the head. It is really a collaborative approach. We've seen the success of that over the last 20 years. And we really believe that this is a good next step, albeit a small one. It's a 5-year pilot. But it's really going to, if it turns out the way we think it is, set us up for a lot of good potential opportunities in the future. Not only to help our neighbors to the south, but to do good things for the system that'll help all of us. And it will result in water to U.S. users, and in my opinion, including to the Imperial Irrigation District.
John, why don't we talk a little bit about the All-American Canal turnout there to the Mexican side? What the downside is, what the upside is, et cetera. Stella, did you have something you want to say? As you want to know if we want to discuss it, so I think that it's an issue plus some negatives, so let's talk about it a little bit.
There are a lot of issues that need to be resolved. Jesse Silva can tell you, he probably has the list memorized, but we have some capacity issues. Mexico would like to have this turnout at a minimum for emergency purposes. If there's another earthquake, let's say, that damages their infrastructure. IID's position is, because of the capacity constraints, it would have to be on a as available basis to deliver that water, or maybe on Sunday. There are a lot of things to work out there. And I think the list we had was maybe 12 or 14 issues that we still have to work out with the United States and Mexico. On the plus side, being a good neighbor, I think, is towards the top of the list. What kind of arrangements as a result of IID's participation or at being at the table with respect to the All-American Canal turnout might lead to a separate agreement with Mexico for acquiring conserved water. That's a possibility. I think there are a number of pluses to that, but they're only going to be pluses if we can work out our issues, and those have to be done.
What are the 12 issues that Jesse said are involved in?
See, Jesse, you're supposed to know that.
I don't recall all of them, Director Menbo, but I think John mentioned, we still have to do an EIR. We have to make sure that the capacity is there, and we have to talk to them about, are there ways to give them that water when we have the capacity and it doesn't hurt us? And there was a lot of issues. I don't remember some of the other ones. I think you mentioned some.
Where was the dredging deal, the capacity you're talking about?
There's some siltation issues, potentially.
But again, we need to look at that. Do we really have to do that? Because during high flows, we have very little capacity. And so is there ways to give them water, like Sundays, or when we have 12-hour runs, give them to them on the PM? Like, for instance, right now when we have 300 or 400 CFS of 12-hour runs, can we just give them to them in the 12 hours at night? Those are the things that we still need to discuss. So there's quite a bit of discussion left to occur yet.
And so you're saying that on working some of these issues out with Mexico and the IID, that there's some possibilities of working some special deals out just with them, between them and the IID, that would be beneficial to the IID?
Sure. I mean, Jesse probably hasn't heard this one, nor has Terry, but I'm going to say it anyway. I mean, what about in a situation where IID, for whatever reason, needed some increased supply? Could we work out an arrangement with Mexico to receive that water and pay them back? Maybe. Could we enter into an agreement that provided for a dual pipeline approach, where water that's conserved could be made available to IID? Maybe. So there are a lot of things I think to look at and to think about. But the most important is to make sure we get our, I'd call them more or less operational issues worked out, so that we could make such an arrangement work.
Anybody have any questions on that All-American, Mr. Carter?
I'd like to hear any questions from the audience if they have any.
Yeah, anybody from the public have any questions? Mr. Brock or Mr. Benson? Since you're the only farmers in the room, what's the deal with water? Come up to the mic, Jim.
The location.
The location of the turnout would be at the end of the All-American Canal, at the very end, opposite the west side main heading. Just cut those off.
Hi, Steve Benson, Brawley. I just had a quick question. This is my first time reading through this, but does this 5-year agreement include the ID on a side letter, or is a side letter for the future after the pilot?
That's a good question. The agreement between IID and MWD is for participation in the pilot project, which is a 5-year project. Essentially, it's going to be 4, because we're almost at the end of this year. It terminates December 31, 2017.
But out of that. And I guess my question is, how long has this agreement been negotiated? But then going forward after the pilot, I assume within a year or two, we're going to start talking about a permanent solution. And can IID sit at the table in that permanent solution?
Yes.
I was going to have the same answer, yes.
All right, just one other thing, sorry. Sure. It's been said that farmers here want to fallow the water, and I'm not quite sure who's fallowing it on the Mexican side, if it's ever been brought up. I understand that they don't have the system to deliver the water, so maybe they just can't utilize all the water. Is that the reality of this?
I think the earthquake followed the water.
So the earthquake fallowed their ground, and they just don't have the ability to use it.
Yeah.
Okay. And is this future turnout ever envisioned to be a pipeline to go to Tijuana or
Yeah,
no?
that's what's part of it. It's extra water to Tijuana.
Okay, so it is.
Yes, they say that they primarily want that for emergency purposes in order to get water to Tijuana if they can't bring it through their system to the pumping station.
Okay.
That's their number one goal. With respect to the fallowing issue, it's true that they're fallowing some ground now because of the infrastructure damage. But it's my understanding, I think Terry can confirm this, is that the Mexican government actually has paid farmers not to demand delivery. In other words, to get the infrastructure done. So in my view, it's fallowed water, which is conserved water as I look at it.
Okay.
That help?
Okay, anybody else from the public? Okay, any other questions from this board? Go, Kevin, what do you want to do with this item?
I've got one
ahead.
more
Go ahead.
question. Now, you have a Colorado River Board meeting tomorrow, right? And there's a vote up there. What vote are they seeking?
To support, essentially to support going forward with Minute 319.
So then we need some direction to give to our representative.
I'm not going, so you're the alternate. You can go.
Mr. Carter will be there.
There.
Do
I think
wear
you could
a
go-
bulletproof vest.
I think that your next step in terms of an action would be on Monday at a time to be determined by the board, and then you could act at a noticed meeting.
Yeah, that's fine.
In the meantime, I don't know that you can give direction.
I would say you shouldn't until you've deliberated and taken action, and I will just tell the board that we met and we discussed it, and you're going to take action one way or the other next Monday, I guess.
Yeah, that's fine. If we want a special meeting, Kevin, for us to take action on it, then we'll call for a special meeting Monday.
That would be a called meeting by you.
Right, that's
and,
fine.
And there may be some travel implications that we'll have to work out with Director Hanks.
Okay. Wait, what's the notice that when are you leaving, Director Hanks?
Saturday.
How about could you have a meeting Friday or?
I think that we'd have a problem with Director Desert on Friday.
I think you're gonna vote no anyway, aren't you?
Sounds like it, but you never know.
So we'll reconnoiter with you tomorrow about a called meeting.
That's fine. Whatever you want to work out with Director Hanks and Director
There'll
Desert.
be a resolution coming forward then.
Yes, I'll confer with Mr. Carter and we'll prepare a fifth action item.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Otherwise, Mr. Carter, Mr. Phelps, we appreciate you coming down here, and you did an eloquent job of presenting the issue, Mr. Phelps. So the first time I met you was before I got on the board when I was on the Colorado River trip, and we were at Lake Mead, and you talked to the group that was on the tour. So I got a taste of you then. You did a good job then. You're doing a good job now.
I think we ought to take pictures of these guys that are willing to come and meet with us, and we just put them on the board so we.
And Terry, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
They made a very wise choice.
I told him the first day that appointment was made, we were at a meeting in Las Vegas, and I said, "Okay, Terry."
Did you go to the National Rodeo Finals?
No, this was just a month ago or so. I told Terry, I said, "You can't, slough off anymore. Now you got to work."
Well,
He's always
anyway.
been a hard worker, though.
Well, they made an excellent choice. Congrats.
Okay.
Thank you, Terry, for participation tonight and making the efforts.
Good. Did anybody need a quick break before we move on to item number 7?
I already
Stella already took
I already
one.
took my break.
Okay, we'll move on. Mr. Silva, item number 7.
Yes, Mr. President, board members, the only item I have is on our update on our water order, and I think I told you last time we were about 130. We're about 140,000 over now today we learned that the Bureau had made an error that we're actually 30,000 acre feet over in excess of the 140, so we're closer to 170,000 is a projection now. So while Terry's still here, if you want to ask him any questions, but it was just an accounting error that happened apparently in August, July and August, in that time period, and then they just verified it, and they kept verifying it, and it is true. And so today's on today's website, it does show show us at 170,000.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Silva?
I just sent him a thank you note for the 30,000.
Terry, if you could just, this has something to do with the operation of Brock Reservoir. If you could just touch on it.
Sure. Just quickly. First of all, let me apologize to you all. We take pride in our technical data that we try to put up. So we've made an error, and when those things happen, the first thing to do is to admit you made it and figure out how it happened and correct it and ensure it doesn't happen again. So what it is, as you know, many people get water off the All-American Canal, of which you all get the largest share. And we prorate, as we call it, the losses that are ascribed to the delivery. And now that we've added Brock Reservoir, that's another inflow, but Brock Reservoir and its operation doesn't get ascribed those same prorated losses. We all agreed that operation shouldn't affect your operation or anyone else's, that it's a system efficiency project. Therefore, the benefit to the system is, in fact, the efficiency gain from the operation of it, therefore, we call those losses due to that reservoir system loss, just like we do evaporation from Lake Mead. Doesn't get prorated to anyone. So we prorate this calculation, and we, starting in May, had an error, and we're not adding in the part of the inflow that goes to Brock. We weren't accounting for that correctly. What that resulted in is that the calculation for the return flows that come off the canal, of which you all get, again, the largest share, we overestimated those returns, which meant we were underestimating the consumptive use. This affects all users on the canal. Again, yours ends up being about a 30,000 acre foot adjustment. Coachella, for instance, is about a 3,000 acre foot adjustment, and that's just because of the difference in the amounts of water that we're transmitting for each of you. With that said, it's just a algebraic error down in the guts of an accounting system, and we apologize for it, and we know it just adds additional focus on you all, and we're sorry for that, but we will do our best to, again, ensure it doesn't happen, and we'll work with you to deal with the resulting overrun, whatever it ends up being this year. It fits within the program, as John Carter mentioned, and we're absolutely going to continue to operate under that agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Silva, that's it. Okay, Mr. Escalera on energy matters.
Just something really quickly, President Menville and fellow members of the board. I just wanted to remind the board and our public that we have initiated our yearly program to inspect all city streetlights now that it's gotten darker sooner. We are going through and actually having our troubleshooters go at night and patrol all the cities, both here in La Quinta, to ensure that the lights are on. If they're not, we're documenting them and then repairing them the very next day. We've repaired over 200 lights so far. And we're also contacting the cities, as not all the lights, when they aren't functioning, is a matter of the IID. Sometimes it's the repairs has to go to the city. We would ask all of our customers to please contact us either through our website or the phone, that if they see a light, to report it, and we'll take care of it really quickly. And we do this on a quarterly basis, but this year we've revamped our program to include notification of the city lights that need repair. And with that, that's all I have, Director Menville.
Okay, any questions for Mario? Okay, thank you, Mario. Move on to number 9, water transfer Financial update, Mr. Broken.
Yes, before I talk about it's really our annual water transfer projections, I want to give the board an update on the financing for the water system conservation projects. Right now, we're expecting to need to issue bond monies in 2014. And so we're going to start the process of retaining some investment bankers to help us with that process. We did that a few years ago. I think it was in 2009. We were a little ahead of ourselves, and we're going to have to go through that process again. It will be a little different this time since we've had legislation and some discussions with the iBank. We're going to ask the iBank to attend all those meetings, attend the investment banking selection process, and be involved in all the bond meetings where we're preparing the documents for approval. We think that will speed the process along from the iBank's point of view, that they will be more familiar with what we've gone through, and that will help their board reach a decision quicker. So we're hoping to send the RFP out for the investment bankers within the next month or so. After that, we will have interviews, shortlist the best responses, interview, and select a banking team. And then as we get closer to 2014, when we know we will need money, we'll start the process of getting all the documents ready for board approval.
Any questions on what Mr. Broken just spoke about?
What would be the projected revenue that you could get from the iBank?
It's not revenue, it's a guarantee, and it's $150 million in net proceeds, I think, in 2003 dollars. So, the further we go out, the larger that number will be, because it's escalated by, I don't remember how it's escalated, but there is a formula to escalate that $150 million guarantee. Right now, we're estimating it up to be about $180 million.
The 50 million up front, is that included in this number that you're talking about?
It will reduce. No, it doesn't. It does not reduce the state's guarantee. The $50 million that we received from the Water Authority does not reduce the state's guarantee.
Okay. So you're looking at, besides the iBank, then you're probably looking at maybe another 100 million bond.
We don't think it's going to be that large. We think we might go over the state's guarantee by 30 or 40 million right now.
Okay.
I think the last time I was before the board making this annual update was in August of 2011. And this evening I'll go through this quickly, but we're going to do a financial projection comparison, talk about the transfer capital projects, cash flow projections for both the transfer and the water delivery system, the opportunities, challenges, and risks facing the water transfer, the financing plan, and then I also have a couple slides to compare our projection to Mr. Dumar's projection.
Did Mr. DeMars, all of his numbers came from you, right?
Not all of them, and that's what I'll talk about where there's some differences, but he did use our water model as the basis for his projections.
Okay, when you say not all of his numbers came from you, what do you mean by that?
Well, if I could wait till I get to those slides, I'll
Go
show
ahead.
where
Go
it's
ahead.
different. As you can see from this slide, the net cash line item beginning in 2010 hasn't changed that much. It's hovered around $2.7 billion. The capital expenses has changed over time as we've received the $50 million from the San Diego County Water Authority and eliminated right now the Mid-Valley Collector Reservoir, which was a very large capital item. So right now, the projection, and this is obviously all subject to change, is about $211 million of capital projects we need to finance. And if the state guarantees 180 million as an example, then we're about, I think that's about a little over 31 million. That wouldn't be guaranteed by the iBank. Revenue projections, not much change over the last 3 years. We have a set formula for the Water Authority now, and so we've kept those assumptions constant. That's why you haven't really seen a change in it. Expenses, they have gone up a little, mainly on the on-farm program gross payments. I think we're starting that program a little earlier and increasing the amount of conserved water in the mid-2026 timeframe. But overall, there hasn't been that much of an increase in those expenses either. This is the latest projection for capital projects and when they will be completed. I won't go over all of them, but I will point out the dollar amount that's the 256 million, and if you reduce that by 45 million, which is the amount of money that we wouldn't have to pay back the Water Authority at that time, that's how you get your 211 million of capital projects that will be financed. This chart just shows the...
Great.
Yes.
Well, what's interties? What does that mean? For 35 million, 35.5 million, what's interties?
Jesse will answer that.
They are going to be canals that connect the end of existing laterals to other laterals.
Okay.
So it'd be just looping or interconnecting canals together so that we can conserve the water that's not being spilled.
Okay, thank you.
Are these, Mr. Silva, on, I know that we've done phase one, which, moves, what was it, 24 million or something like that, and you're looking at 256 million here, but these all have to come to the board for future votes to approve moving all these things forward, right?
That's correct.
And then I know you've got the WCAB asking for reservoirs and other things. So some of this stuff is going to change as time goes on.
Yeah, right now this is the best that we can do to get a cash flow projection. But for instance, we showed 2 West Side Main reservoirs. Well, I'm not sure that we're going to do 2 of them. We're going to do 1 to begin with, and then we'll see whether we do the second one or not.
Yeah, but I mean, I understand what you're saying. You're trying to get a cash flow, so you're sticking to the original plan of
To
how
some
to do the
extent,
system.
but we've added, for instance, seepage recovery and minor projects. We bumped that up and lowered some of the other ones. And so, yeah, we're...
But basically, you said the system can do 100,000 acre feet, so you're sticking to the original plan of trying to get
Yeah.
100,000 out of the system. And then if future board changes the way you're doing business, they just change the way you're doing business.
Yeah, still have to come and present a major work authorization and all that. So we're still a ways off from finalizing all that.
That's fine. Okay, no problem. Go ahead. Or Stella?
Yeah, the reservoirs, how big were they going to be? How many?
The biggest one is probably going to be that West Side Main reservoir, 60 to 80 acres, somewhere there. The other ones, for instance, if you see mid-lateral reservoirs, inline mid-lateral reservoirs, those are the smallest ones, probably 8, 9, 10 acre feet. And then the mid-lateral reservoirs, they're like in 20, 30, 10 to 30 acres in size.
Thank you.
The cumulative cash flow projection for the water transfer, as you see in the near term, when I say near term through 2019, there's not too much of accumulation, but as the years go by, that's where you see your greatest increases. And then the next slide will be pretty much the opposite for the water department or water delivery system. You see there's through 2019, we don't have that large of a deficit, but then that accumulates to a little over $2 billion by the end of the term of the transfer. So some of the opportunities that the transfer provides, one is in our model, and this is just for budgeting purposes, we have $2.4 billion being distributed to the local agricultural community for on-farm conservation. If you allocate that based on the number of agricultural accounts, it's about $403,000. And if you allocate it based on the number of commercial agricultural customers, it's around $7.5 million over the transfer period. And I think we used about 350 as the number of farm accounts that we had. Not accounts, but a number of farms. Transfer allows for the all transfer and delivery system capital projects from 2020 through 2047 to be funded through the agreement, through the transfer
Excuse me,
agreement.
Greg, go back.
Sure.
The approximate average is 7.5 million per commercial agricultural customer.
Yes.
And they still want the energy side to subsidize the electricity for their pump back system, pumps? Just a rhetorical
Okay,
question.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We project, as I mentioned earlier, borrowing for the water system conservation projects initially, but there will be replacements to those projects, and then all the other water delivery system projects that we're going to have, and we expect to be funded without borrowing. And then we still will maintain our debt coverage requirements, even though there's a substantial projected shortfall from the water delivery operations. I don't think this slide has changed since the last presentation. We realize that our projections over a long time span, out to 2047, assumptions have changed, and we expect them to continue to change. Every time Jesse gives me an update on the overrun, that's an assumption that changes, and we have to factor into our model. QSA litigation, a lot of it's been already decided, but there's still a risk there. And then also it's the challenge and the risk of meeting water conservation levels on time or savings. Until we get those projects started, there's the risk that we can't meet the timeline in the contract. I'll talk about the second bullet. We plan on issuing about $230 million of bonds for the System Conservation Program, capital expenditures, and we expect to do that in 2014 and 2016. What we've modeled is about $123 million in 2014 and $106 million in 2016. Now, those are the gross numbers, because the net numbers, if you add the net numbers up, that's the $211 million I discussed earlier. But there are issuance costs associated with the borrowing, and we also have to maintain a debt service reserve. So both of those issues are funded out of the bond issue, which makes it higher than the amount of money that's available for the capital projects. Director Minville, hopefully my explanation will explain the differences between Mr. Dumar's projection and our projection on slide 12. There are three main differences right now. If you look down at the bottom, we're showing, IID showing a surplus of $2.6 billion. On one of his projections, he had a deficit of $1 billion. So roughly about a $3.7 billion difference. That can really, the bulk of that can be addressed by three items. The first one is the mitigation revenue above the JPA cap. He's, under Mr. Dumar's projection, he reduced that revenue by the $1.5 billion but he left the expenses associated with that in the projection. And our position is that if the state doesn't make good on their commitment, we're not going to incur the expenses.
So you remove from one side, remove from the other side.
Yeah, he removed it from one
Yeah,
side.
but you still have the environmental problem, Greg.
That's true, but from our point of view, from the financial projection, is that's the state's responsibility, and we're not going to put anything in our model that is not a legal requirement of the district.
Yeah, the 1.1 billion there shortfall was the amount of money that showed in the original model. That was a contribution, a planned contribution from the state.
That's correct.
Okay, so if they fail to deliver, come through, then we have to adjust the model, our financial model, plus whatever mitigation issues but I guess we cross that bridge when we get there, huh?
Yes, that's how I look at it also.
Director Hanks, I remember this came up when Mr. DeMars was presenting, and I think that the disagreement in projections was that if the state were to renege, that the mitigation would still have to continue. And I believe that was his position. And I believe that the countervailing opinion was that, well, if the state reneged, there would be a breach and everything would stop. So I think that's the...
Right, yeah.
The other large item which is causing the difference is the subsidies for other IAD programs, and that's really the water delivery system. What we're talking about there is about 1.3 or 1.4 billion dollars of replacement costs for the water delivery system that is unrelated to the transfer, and then the remaining part is just the shortfall within the water delivery operations. So our position is that those really aren't transfer-related costs; those are water delivery costs and shouldn't be shown as a burden on the transfer.
But you had said that the transfer was going to rebuild the 100-year-old system. There's enough money there through the transfer to rebuild the whole
that's
system.
including in that, but it's not, that's the benefit of the transfer.
Right,
It's not really
right.
a burden or expense.
Yes, and he's saying there's a $1.7 billion extra cost there.
1.3 of that is rebuilding the delivery system, yes.
That's under
1.3 or
environmental costs?
1.7?
Well, there are other costs in that 1.7
Okay.
besides the capital costs of
Okay.
replacing the system.
So they are going to get refurbished. We are going
Yeah, if our model turns out to be correct, yes, there will be monies available to replace the system based on the, I think it was the R.W. Beck who did that study.
Why was it that Mr. DeMars didn't pick up on? He saw it one way, you saw it another way. Why is that?
I just can't explain it. I mean, I think it's just a difference of opinion.
Well, I think whenever you start your transfer with the infrastructure that you're going to put in place, there's going to be replacement, and that's going to be an increased amount. And I think what you're showing here, you're rolling that over. Okay, now that becomes an IID distribution issue because now that's the existing system that's put in place. So the system itself is going to raise the expenditures. Okay, so do you ask the transfer to keep paying for them, or does that now become the existing distribution system? I think that's where the difference is.
And then the last large item is the Salton Sea remediation, where he's put in $450 million as the district's 5% share of the preferred alternative. And my argument, or the finance argument, is very similar to the mitigation argument above. That's a state responsibility and not the district's responsibility. So the state would have to step up and make good on their commitments. And so that's why we don't put it in our forecast. So if you add those three items up, that's way over $3 billion of the $3.7 billion difference. I'll drop down to the water transfer net cash line. As you can see, from 2010 to 2012, that number hasn't changed much. You've previously seen it. You will see some difference on the next two lines, or I should say one of the next two lines. The Water Department capital replacement forecast has remained the same, a little less than $1.4 billion. And you'll see on the next line the delivery operations, the shortfall was 700 million. It dropped down to 469, and then it's back up to 756. What's causing the majority of that increase is in 2011, I had the modelers increase the amount of interest income we would receive from our cash balances. We had been using roughly 1% as what we could earn on our money. And that's currently about what we are earning on our money. And I said, well, over time, I think we're going to get up to 3%. And now I'm not so optimistic. I moved it back to 1%. And that just shows you the impact of the compounding of even a 1 or 2% rate over a 20 or 30 year period, how much increase that was. That's about not quite $300 million of less income by moving from 3% to 1%.
Any questions for Mr. Broken? Okay,
thank you.
Greg, thank you very much. We'll move on to, we got 3 action items to go, so we'll just run them on out. First one's 10, approved major work authorization covering a special protection system for Path 42. Juan Carlos.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, board members. My name is Juan Carlos Sandoval, Assistant Manager for Energy Department. I'm here representing Mr. Steels as he's out of town in a meeting.
He's in Hawaii. He's in Hawaii.
Oh,
Actually not. He's in San Francisco. He'll
Okay,
be
well, I already
back
was in Hawaii.
Oh, he's at that conference where presenters.
Yes.
You know, we had discussion on this before, and I'd like to recommend that we approve the major work authorization for the Path 42 special protection system.
Is there a second to that?
That's my motion.
I'll second it. Is there any discussion by the board?
Yeah, I've got a question. On the change of rating from 600 megawatts to 800 megawatts, can you guarantee that to us? That 800?
That is subject to power flow analysis that we're, still conducting with Southern California Edison. And also it requires additional generation interconnected to Midway Highlands in order to push that power. I think right now we're trying to push up to 700 megawatts with the current generation that we have in the queue. So it's dependent upon generation coming online. But the special protection system, can, as well as capacitor banks additions at Ramon and Coachella Valley, can warranty the rate increase to up to 800 megawatts.
On the balancing authority, there's certain expectations of us by neighboring balancing authorities. Will this meet the requirement on this line for us as far as outages and the expectation of our responsibility as a balancing authority?
The duty to serve, that kind of thing.
It enhances system reliability.
Yeah. So this may be considered somewhat of an overbill, but it's necessary for the balancing authority.
Yes, it enhances the system reliability in the Coachella Valley area as it reduces the amount of generation in the event of a double contingency, losing all the connections with Edison. Instead of all the power trying to flow through the transformers that could overload them, is going to reduce the amount of generation so we avoid the cascading.
What I'm trying to do in my mind to have a peace of mind on this is when I look at it, as far as immediate need, it may not be there. But as far as protection of the balancing authority, I think it's imperative that we have it in place.
That is correct. It's considered. My understanding is that it's considered an essential component of the Path 42 build out.
Okay, and again, where's the funding coming from?
It's coming from revenues.
From the
2012 and 2013 and
okay,
2014.
and this is from
revenues.
the Balancing Authority Fund. Is that right, Greg?
Yes, right now we're planning on funding all of Path 42 out of the Balancing Authority Reserve Fund.
Okay, or a bond, maybe a possibility of a bond if that's.
That's always an option, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And that amount that we're funding is $5 million? That we're needing to fund the Path 42 upgrades?
It's $5.877 million
and-
dollars.
And are there any other associated upgrades to the collector system after that? That we
As I
need?
mentioned, in order to enhance instant reliability, it will be linked also to an upgrade to Coachella Valley substation, and we're working in an MWA that we're going to bring in the next 3-4 weeks. For the rating increase from 6 to 800 megawatts, 92 kV capacitor banks upgrades are also needed, and we are also putting together an MWA for that. We're going to bring the Ramon Cap Bank in the next 3 weeks.
That's above and beyond the $5 million, the 5
That's
plus
above and
million.
beyond, yes.
But isn't it true though, Mr. Sandoval, that the 5.8 million is now subsumed in the original 25 million for Path 42?
No, it's in addition to the 25.8 for Path 42, which is the reconductoring of the line.
Didn't the bids come back in where you have you're well under the 25 million estimate on
Yes,
Path 42?
yes, and that's something that we are planning to take advantage. Actually, RFP 921, we got very good responses, and
So Mr. Stills will be back to your
Yeah.
board with
more
In the timetable for that additional upgrades to the collector system, in addition to the $5+ million for the Path 42 and the RAS, will that additional upgrades of some $20+ million, it sounds like, is that going to happen in 2012 and 2013?
You have an in-service date on Path 42 of April of 2014? Is that
April
right?
2014 for Path 42 upgrade.
So that, in fact, we'll experience some $25 million in inputs for the upgrade, the RAS, the circuits, and the other infrastructure.
Yes, the RAS, this work, the special protection systems, its in-service date that we are planning is the end of next year, first quarter.
And on the other
2014
side of the line,
2014.
Edison on the other side of the line is living up to their standards and requirements to in fact make this a reality.
We are working together with
Right,
Edison.
and they're
Coordinated.
watching our actions to see what we're doing to make sure it matches them.
Is both ways.
Do we have any idea what their costs are going to be to the Path 42 on their side?
No, I know I don't have the numbers, but my assumption is probably going to be higher than ours.
My understanding is that they were figuring on 25 million as well. Are they moving at the same on the same schedule that we are?
Yes, we're coordinated. And this is contingent upon the permits. We're moving forward with the environmental permits, which we expect to have it by October next year. Okay. So it's still contingent upon environmental permits.
And Mr. Broking, similar to what you mentioned with Director Hanks a little while ago, the funding mechanism for this is structured in our budgets coming up.
Yes, what we have in our budget right now is through the Balancing Authority Fund. But as Director Hanks mentioned, there is an option of borrowing also from for some transmission projects too.
And just for recollection, that Balancing Authority Fund, that half a penny equates to how much a year?
Around $16 million a year.
Thinks he ain't gonna borrow. Don't talk about borrowing Mr. Benson in the room, so. Okay, please vote. Thank you. We're going to move on to item number 11, acknowledge receipt of financial report for September 30th, 2012. Mr. Brogan?
Yes, if I could, I'd just like to talk about 2 pages in the board package on 118. Just on the last line 16, debt coverage, our approved budget, excuse me, was about 1.6 times debt service coverage. Right now, we're forecasting to be a little higher than that at 1.83. But what we really need to be at is somewhere at 2 or above. So my concern is if we hover around these numbers for too long, we'll get downgraded, which will increase the cost of our borrowing. And then the last thing I'd like to point out is on page 131. It's also with the Energy Department.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
How do you propose to get to 2 or above?
Well, in our budget next year, we have a rate increase, as I think as everyone knows, of 1 cent to the base rate.
That's a nasty word.
I understand that.
Okay, so rate increase will get you to 2 plus then.
It should, yes. We're still waiting on the capital, the final capital
Okay, tell
plan.
Mr. Benson to cover his ears over there, so.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Greg.
Okay.
I get them funny phone calls before the election about me making rate increases, so go ahead.
The only other thing I'd like to point out is on 131, line 1, working capital cash. You see in September we had $18 million. That's going to go down considerably in October because we made a $20 million debt service payment. We're forecasting that to be negative for the entire year. And that's just the 2 items I wanted to highlight this morning.
Okay, any questions on those 2 items for Mr. Broking? Okay, thank you. Oh, we got to take action, right? Is there a motion to acknowledge this?
I'll second it.
Okay, please vote. Okay, thank you. Item number 12, adopt the resolution designating Richard Curry of Curry and Hudson as a negotiator for meet, confer with the Professional Salary Association. Mr. DeVoy.
Manager, Human Resources and Loss Control.
I made a motion to approve the resolution
Is there a
designating Mr. Courier as the negotiator.
Is there a second? I'll second it. Any discussion? Mr. Hanks, you guys table this, so you got any discussion on this?
Nope.
Okay, Mr. Desert, you have any discussion?
Not at this time.
Please vote. Okay, cool. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, that's the end of the meeting. And Kevin, the meeting on the, you will, what do we do about a special meeting either Friday or Monday? What are you going to do about that?
We're tentatively scheduling for Monday, and we'll talk to you about time tomorrow.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna head up there tomorrow. And I'll be coming back Friday